All right, we are about to have an interesting conversation with Sarah Westall. She is an entrepreneur, tech expert, host of the Sarah Westall podcast, author of numerous books, including First Meet the Inventor of Blockchain, Wrong Side of History, America's Alliance with Islamic Terrorists, and Connection of Water, all of them very different. She is a versatile person. And this conversation is going to go in a variety of wild directions. So we're going to talk about tech and DOGE. She's been hot on that subject right now. But we're also going to be talking about maybe aliens and religion. And we might talk about astrology and the connection of water and how we're all connected. She is so fascinating. I really enjoy listening to her podcast. And I really wanted to get her here on the show so that you guys could meet Sarah as well. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Kim, for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, let's start off with the current administration. Every day, it's like such a whirlwind. How many days has he been in office now? Over just like 50 days?
50 some, yeah.
50 something days. And it
52,
is
I think,
just,
yep.
what do you make of the, I didn't vote for Trump or Biden, but I definitely preferred Trump over Biden, absolutely, but wasn't super supportive of everything. So I couldn't bring myself to actually vote for him because now I can actually say I didn't agree with the guy on this, and here he's doing it. So, um, but I have to say I like a lot of what he's done. There's a lot of stuff there that he's doing. DOGE is controversial, right? There's a lot of people who really like what's happening with DOGE, and we want to see the government cut spending. And now we're finding out about all this crazy spending that USAID was doing, and supporting like trans this and Sesame Street that, and just weird stuff that it's like, why is our government supporting that? Um, but there are definitely a lot of skeptics on this about the kind of control, Elon Musk not being an elected official,
Mhm.
going in there, having access, the team that he's hired having access to data. There's a lot of concern about DOGE. And one of my criticisms right now about the whole thing is I like seeing that they're going in there and they're finding all this waste, fraud, and abuse. But now we're in the middle of this fight for the budget. And Trump wants a continuing resolution, wants to keep the budget at the levels it pretty much is at right now. So it's like, wait a minute, what was the point of slashing all of this government funding with DOGE and maybe getting rid of the Department of Education and all this getting rid of everything? And yet the budget stays the same essentially in this continuing resolution until September, which, then maybe they'll kick the can down the road again. I don't know. So I have some mixed feelings. You've been talking a lot about this. What is your take on it right now? Do you think they're successful? Do you think that there's a right to be a little worried about the technocracy coming around and maybe having a little bit too much access?
Well, okay, this is where I think we are looking at things from like years. That ship has already sailed. I had Bill Binney and Kurt Wiebe and all these NSA whistleblowers on my show years ago talking about, you have Snowden that came out. Binney came out and talked about Thin Thread, which was early 2000s. They had access to our data at levels that people, I mean, the fact that we're even having these conversations is kind of disingenuous when it comes to data because they have access to everything. They
Mm.
have access to our telecom. I come from telecom. They have access to all of that. They have access to all of our banking. When you're watching an FBI show or something and you see them just get into any bank account or whatever, that stuff is true. They have access to everything pretty much. And, and all the whistleblowers 15, 20 years ago were telling us that. And now with this new thing with DOGE, I mean, DOGE, you should always be concerned about data being at risk, right? I mean, that's just a common concern. But him not being elected, it's like, well, all these people who have access to our data are not elected. And
Mhm.
they have all this data. And so my point isn't that that's not an issue. It's just this issue has been around for 20 years. And where were you complaining about it before? And now that DOGE is actually going off, showing some serious fraud and corruption, now you're all freaking out. With
Mhm.
DOGE, I would have to say that DOGE is a front to a lot of crime. And the fronts did some good stuff. And so the people who are working in those fronts are not going to understand. I mean, they don't understand. They thought they were doing good work, and they were doing good work. And so shedding that stuff down, they have to be really careful not to, to carve out the good, and be very careful not to get rid of that, but disclose these crime syndicates that are behind it, like doing coups against countries. USAID
Mhm.
was used to overthrow countries. I mean, is that really what we want to do without any kind of knowledge about what's going, and have NGOs be doing all this? And then being involved in crime rings, whether it's trafficking or there's a lot that's behind this. And
Yeah.
that's important to be exposed. That if you want to clean up our country at all, you have to expose that stuff and clean that out. I don't know.
Which I'm
It kind of seems like, go ahead.
no, I mean, I'm all for that. I definitely want that. I just don't want it done on a partisan way. And I guess that's my biggest concern is that I am seeing a lot of partisan, you know, like one of the things I really supported about the Trump administration was freedom, right? The freedom movement,
That's right.
free speech and stopping the political persecution and all of those things. But all I'm seeing right now, I feel like, is a swap. I'm not really seeing an end, but more of a swap. And that
It's, yeah.
I don't like that. I don't I want to get rid of the rot at the core and then let America be America, but I don't like seeing the swap happen. And I don't maybe and we may disagree. I don't actually know your position on things like Israel and its influence in our government, but to me, that is like a giant threat. I don't think any foreign country, whether they be friend or foe, should have that level. And it doesn't matter about my individual feelings about the country. I just don't like any foreign country having that kind of control over my politicians, who I believe should be advocating for the best interest of Americans in the United States more than anything else. And I'm just seeing kind of a swap on that free speech, where Democrats were going after the J6ers, calling them all terrorists and saying that they were committing an insurrection. I mean, stuff that I just thought was absolutely insane. And then to see the Trump administration now going after protesters who protest against a foreign country, not even protesting America so much, but protesting a foreign country and our support of a foreign country, and then saying, well, we're going to go after them and we're going to criminalize their behavior. And, I don't really, I don't like that. And I don't like this idea of swapping the Russia-Ukraine war and getting rid of all that waste, fraud, and abuse, and like the regime changes that were going on and whatnot with USAID, but now pivoting towards, oh, we're just going to siphon that money back towards another war with Iran at the behest of Israel, because they're the ones who want that war. I don't want that war. I don't care about
I
whether
don't want any wars,
right. I mean, if
right?
Iran
I
it
mean,
doesn't exist today or tomorrow, same with Israel. Like if none of the countries in the Middle East, they could like reshake up that map and redraw the line. It would literally make no difference to my life here as an American. So I don't know what we're doing over there at all or
well,
caring,
I think that's true about all Americans. I think most Americans don't really care about the Middle East. But, I had Giuliani on my program. Somebody asked me, and I said, okay, I'll bring him on because I wanted to talk about how he was attacked in the courts because I think our legal system is broken, right? And I wanted
Yeah.
to explore that. Well, he just came off the Columbia University protest, right? It was when that
Mhm.
whole thing exploded. And I made a comment that I didn't like the fact that they stood down for 6 hours. And I started throwing at him some of this. It was a false flag, right? We're basing an entire war on a false flag. I didn't say false flag to him. I just talked about specific elements of that day. He exploded on me. I got yelled at for about 20 minutes. And then I calmed him down. It was fine, whatever. I am not it was pretty at the time. It was kind of like, wow. I'm not supportive of the Israel situation because I don't think we should be in any kind of war based on a false flag where we're brought into a war under false pretenses. I think that is wrong. And then I also heard on the radio just the other day someone make a comment, we shouldn't, if there's even 10 innocent people in Gaza, we shouldn't go to war there, right? And then they actually had a serious conversation where they didn't think there was even 10 innocent people in all of Gaza, including women and children.
Wow.
This was on the radio. Yeah. To me, that is so extreme that you lose your mind to thinking like that. And, I grew up in a Christian household. My mother was a Eucharistic minister. My father was always the senior warden at the church. I always had to acolyte. I am not super religious now, but I grew up
Mhm.
in that. And so I understand that environment. My husband's father was a deacon in the Catholic Church. So I come from that environment. And I can tell you that if you're a Christian, you don't support slaughtering people like this. And you also, is supporting the Jewish people does not mean supporting the state of Israel, supporting a
Mhm.
government. It was never about that. It's supporting individual people. It's supporting the individual Gazans. That's the point of this, is that you
Mhm.
support people who are downtrodden. And they were always persecuted all through history. And and so that was the point of that, not what we're seeing today. And so Christians are being snowed by this. And then when you hear propaganda on the radio in that direction, it's really disheartening because that's
Yeah.
pure propaganda. It was very obvious.
Right.
So yeah, you touched a nerve with me. I'm not supportive of that, but I'm not
Okay.
supportive of the Ukraine Russian war either. I mean, I think that that's the Democrats are supportive of that, and I'm not supportive of that war either. I mean, we first of all, we threw over, in 2014, we had a coup, probably using USAID or some other NGOs behind government organizations. We threw over the Ukrainian government. Their treasury was brought down to, like, $57 or something. The Minsk agreement, we were supposed to have a buffer zone, and we had 200,000 troops along the Russian border, just egging them on.
Yeah.
Plus, they were slaughtering people in the region. So when you really understand the history of that, that's a really crappy situation too. It's like we're on the bad end, the wrong side of both of these wars. You
Mhm.
just don't treat people like this without trying to negotiate.
So
So, you know,
that's why this current administration has been disappointing to me in this aspect, because I do feel like we're just swapping. I want to end the Russia-Ukraine war, because I'm with you. We clearly we were just trying to annoy. We've been trying to annoy Russia for decades with the expansion of
right,
NATO. That's just what we're there just to annoy them. And then what did we expect to happen? We were egging them on, taunting them, and then a war broke out. And
that's right.
they told us, like, this will happen. You keep it up, it's going to happen. And we kept it up, and it happened. And so um, we absolutely have to end that. And in my opinion, we should just NATO is a funny thing, right? And there's a lot of chatter right now about ending NATO. And I've always said we should get out of NATO. What are we doing in NATO? I don't. But now I'm actually thinking maybe we need to stay in NATO, but we need to rethink why we have NATO. For whatever reason, they created NATO to stop the Soviets. That doesn't even make sense. It should have been created to say to Germany, you're not allowed to militarize. And so we are now going to be your collective defense to help you out in the event of something happens to you, because we don't trust you, your country, with a military, because each time you
That's right.
guys rise up, you start a world war. And they're like on the brink of doing it again. I mean, that's the insanity of it, right? Is that now the Europeans, because the US wants to back out of Ukraine, the Europeans are all getting together, and it's like the Germans, and they're saying, well, we have to rise up. We need to start manufacturing more weapons. We have to buy European weapons. We're not going to buy US weapons. We need to rise up. We need to beef up our military. Germany's talking about we need to beef up our conscription. I mean, they're talking about beefing up their military again. And why? Because they want to continue the war against Russia using Ukraine. They're
Mhm.
telling us with a straight face. They're like, we plan on keeping this going. We realize you guys went out, but we are all in on starting World War III. And it's like, why did we think NATO needed to stop Russia when in real and the Soviets, when in reality it should have been to just keep the Germans at bay from their big grand plans of constantly putting us into a war. So now I'm like, maybe we need
Well,
NATO, but like just to keep the Germans from rising back up again, because they're scary.
well, war always happens when there's a global economic reset. And I
Yeah.
think the backdrop is the whole global economy, right? But what people don't realize about NATO is they have a large presence on our Langley base. NATO does. And NATO is actually commanding a lot of our generals and military officers.
Hmm.
It's different than what people, yeah, I did a whole coverage on it a few years ago, and how NATO was, it's different than people realize. And NATO has more power than people realize. And so getting on a NATO, I would like to see us be in a better power position with NATO. They don't command us. We decide when we want to work with NATO. That doesn't seem very good for that. To me, that seems like worldwide army.
Yeah.
And if they're commanding us, that bothers me quite a bit. But I think we're in a position where and war is changing too with the big tech, with high tech. We don't need to even have people involved in most of these things. It's a bunch of clones fighting each other.
Yeah.
And the technology is so advanced that war is just different now. And I think the war that we're seeing now is all like fifth generation warfare. It's all, they're bypassing the battlefields and going right to manipulating people. And how
Hmm.
do they, just come infiltrating the countries and manipulating the people? Like, we have this color revolution going on in the United States still, and the division is so extreme. And
Yeah.
I think that's by design. We're just a really broken country right now.
I know it is frightening. I was thinking about that earlier this morning. Just like I think we're the Roman Empire, and I don't know if we can be saved. It's kind of, when you think about all the
Yeah.
corruption in our and you've talked about this on your shows. I was watching some of your shows, and you've talked about how, there's just this corruption with these politicians. And they get in there and they make 100 something thousand a year, and they walk out multi-mega millionaires. I mean, it's just insane. It's very much like the Roman Empire. And how do we, like, we need the people who are corrupt to fix the corruption. And that doesn't usually work, right? They're not going to make laws to decorrupt themselves. And so I just don't know where we're headed, except for, I guess I sometimes I get a little negative or pessimistic, just thinking, I guess we just have to go the way of the Roman Empire, which is kind of a slow demise and slow loss of power and slow loss of influence around the world. And it's nothing major, it's nothing drastic. It doesn't happen all at once, but it just slow. And we're kind of seeing that, with the formation of BRICS
Mhm.
and countries now saying, well, we can't, now you're tariffing all of us, so now we're not going to even, they're starting to think the United States is not really reliable, and they're right. I mean, and I understand why Trump is doing certain things to try to take some of the power back,
Mhm.
but it's risky, right? It's risky. I mean, you go down that road, you either win or lose. It's kind of all or nothing. He's either going to win this tariff war, and it's going to have the intended outcome that he's hoping for, or the rest of the world just says, F you, United States, we're done with you. Like, we don't need you. We've got a whole lot of billions of people everywhere else, and you'll just be isolated and on your own.
Well,
And that's a
I think
possibility.
well, I think the FU United States, and it's pretty much the FU the dollar, I think
Right. Yeah.
is where a lot of people, or where a lot of countries wanna go already. But the dollar is really not just the United States, it's the European central bankers as well, and they command a lot of that. And especially these countries, and these South American or African countries, where the central bankers have come in and just pillaged their resources. And what they do is they make agreements with them that they pay off all this debt. It's, like the economic hitman. Have you ever had him on, Perkins, on your show, or listened to any? He's
I
That's
don't
right.
know.
What he's talking about is right. They do this. So what they
Yeah.
do is they go in, they want the resources in that country. And so they offer to give them this huge loan payment, which they're going to have to pay off. But with that money, they hire international companies like our companies or other ones in Europe. We benefit. We get to use the resources. They pay for our companies to build them up, and then they have to pay the debt off. And then these people are impoverished and they don't have any money. USAID did a lot of this stuff too, where they were sending food to these countries. The countries could not pay off the debt of the central bankers. So they were selling the food the USAID was giving them to pay off the debt to the central bankers. And then their people were still starving. I
Jeez.
mean, It's these kinds of things, and so these countries really want to get out from underneath the dollar
Mhm.
because of that whole thing that they're doing. And I mean, when you say a slow demise, I mean that kind of stuff. If these countries could get out tomorrow, they would. But see, the central bankers are. Gosh, I have a lot of connections on what's happening. I don't talk about it a lot because I'm like, well, I'm just kind of waiting as an investigative journalist to see what's actually going to happen because you can't
Mhm.
really report on the financial system until it's kind of a chicken egg. You just don't know what's going to happen and kind of dangerous what's happening in the world. It's going on right now. There's a lot of negotiations around the world. Um, Leaders of countries want to align either with the BRICS or with there's other funds out there too that can help pay off their debt and make them more independent. And there's blackmail going on. There's families being threatened. I mean, this is all happening right now. And so Trump is what he's doing. And I don't know. I see all these facts. I think there's like 5 factions. I've narrowed it down to. And I know there's the central bankers. I don't know where Trump fits in. I don't know if he's aligned with the central bankers. I don't think he's aligned with the BRICS. And I think he's aligned with some other, with some of the cryptocurrency stuff going on.
Mhm.
It'll be very interesting to see what happens because that's the number one. I see it as the number one thing going on right now that's causing everything that we're seeing. That and the mind control, the fifth generation warfare. I know that sounds conspiratorial, but that have you ever had Robert Epstein on your show, the Harvard scientist that is doing all the research on Google and social media?
Yes, I have had him on, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah,
Let me just check my
he he's really
I
good
think
as far
I
as
remember. Yes, I've had him on. Yeah,
but
he is great.
so
And he
the
does
reason
have
I
to be very
the reason
careful. Didn't they kill his family and stuff? Like, wasn't there
he killed his wife, yeah, they
Yeah,
threatened it.
right,
Yeah,
yeah,
it is very dangerous. So, I mean,
yeah.
and so there's so much control, and he just showed an experiment that they did in Australia, and it showed and this is I think is low tech. There's more powerful mind control stuff than this. But the experiment they did in Australia, they showed that over I don't know the exact percentages, but 90 some percent of the people were affected by the misinformation enough to change their vote, and only 3% even knew they were looking at misinformation.
Mm,
So or just false information. So this is being bombarded at us all the time, right? I mean, that was an experiment, so they were purposely trying to figure out how they could manipulate people. But the manipulation is so extreme. So this is everything that we're seeing going on right now.
yeah,
And I think it's all tied to that. And that's why we're like, "Oh, this is crazy. Whatever happened to before we started the show, whatever happened to nuance? Whatever happened to just balance?
right.
Why is everything so crazy?" I think it's because of that.
How do we stop that? That's the misinformation thing is tough, right? And this the Democrats, what was their solution? Censor everybody, right? Like we don't want to hear any, and then they would label anything they didn't like as misinformation, even when it wasn't misinformation, true stuff. Everything just got labeled that they didn't like. And that's what's so dangerous about trying to combat misinformation and propaganda. But you're right, the propaganda is very powerful. And people, I mean, I watch it happen in real time with these, and I know that they've got these consultant groups that, like, for example, how do you get, I'm sure they sit around their tables and they're paid millions of dollars. And they're sitting around, they're saying, okay, how do we get, the right wing Republican MAGA movement is anti war. How do we get them from this new anti-war sentiment that they've picked up to wanting war with Iran? How do we need to get them to want war with Iran. And I think they sit around, they have these conversations and they're like, okay, we'll start, we'll meet them where they're at. And then we kind of slowly say this to them and get them to move to this spot. And then we say a little more and we get them to move to this spot. And then, and through time, we eventually get them to where they're just foaming at the mouth for war with Iran.
Yep,
And they're so smart at planning this, and I watch it happen, where it's the same people that say they don't want any censorship, they're for free speech, and then suddenly it's like, how do you get them to wanna censor a whole group of people? And they eventually do it. So the propaganda and the mind games are real, they're powerful, people are easily persuaded, but what do we do? I mean, I don't want to be like the Democrats and just start censoring everything. It's like, what do we do?
I don't know, and that's the whole point, that there's these tools are so powerful, right? They have such powerful tools. I think we have to keep holding their feet to the fire and look at their actions, and just ensure that they don't censor voices, because the only way that we can counter this kind of tyrannical behavior from whoever is doing it is to have common sense voices countering it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, I think that there's people out there who are against everything that Trump does. And I don't
Hmm.
think that's right either. I think
Hmm.
then that what happens is you end up alienating yourself. You're not any better than the Democrats when you're doing that, because I can't follow or align with you if everything's bad, because I can't
Right.
say that looking at DOGE, like the stuff they're doing, uncovering all the fraud, waste, and abuse. I can't say that's bad. I mean, how can you possibly say that's bad? You know what I mean? So we have to have reasonable voices not being censored. And
Yeah.
that's the important. When they said that we'd be sheep led to the slaughter if if we don't get to speak, that's true. We're living it right now.
Hmm.
We have to have these moderate voices.
Yeah. And I love, the waste, fraud, and abuse that DOGE is exposing. I just want them to expose more. I don't
Oh,
want
I
them to
want it to go
cherry pick.
deeper. Yeah.
Yeah, I want
Oh,
more. I want them to go after the Pentagon and really expose what the hell is the Pentagon spending the money on? Where did all the disappeared money go? There's like trillions that we don't even know where the money was spent, like $3 trillion. What? 3 trillion lost dollars? Are you kidding me? Guarantee
yeah.
that's not in
Where
my
is
bank
that?
account. Where is it? Yeah, they need to
There was
find it.
there was a there was a politician that was talking that she allocated $12 billion to a project. I don't remember the project. It's just one of many, but this one just stuck out in my mind. And it was a committee that allocated a certain 12 billion to a project, and they asked about it later, and they acted like they didn't know what it was, and they didn't know where the money was. And she's like, how does like 12 billion just disappear? It's off the books, as if we didn't even allocate it to anything. And I
Yeah,
think that's the kind of stuff that's going on that just, oh, it's gone. And it adds up, right? And I, like you, I want to see it. I want to go after, I want to go after everything, the Pentagon, everything. But
yeah,
I think you're right. I think it's a partisan thing. I mean, I see factions fighting. I think it's the power elite that are fighting. There's factions, and I think it's tied to this currency reset. And I think they're going to use some of this stuff to take down their enemies in the other faction. I mean, that's what I think's happening. That's my theory. I don't know. I don't
yeah.
have proof on that. But human behavior that's consistent with human behavior, right? That they
That
would
the
take
this
down their enemies.
Oh, yeah, that's what they're right, but that's what they were saying they didn't like the other side doing. That was like, and that's kind of my beef with it is that we can't. What I would like to see is I want to see a restructuring. I want a nonpartisan restructuring to where, yeah, maybe it's Elon and Doge or whoever goes in there and cuts all the waste, fraud, and abuse across the board. Doesn't matter what the politics are on it, and then figure out a way to ensure that the other side, when they get into power, cannot reinstate all of it. Or it's got to be
That's right.
beneficial for both sides, that whatever's happening, it has to be beneficial for just Americans in general. And that way, because what I think is going to happen is, we would be totally moronic to believe that Democrats are never going to be back in power. Of course they're going to be back in power at some point, whether it be 2028. Probably, I have a hard time thinking they're going to be reelected anytime soon, but maybe 2028, 2032 or whatever. And when they're back in there, they're going to take their own chainsaw. They're going to create their own form of
For sure.
Doge now that they've seen this. And they're going to do their same thing with their own chainsaw, cutting all of the programs that the other side liked or supported, or and I just don't want to see
Well,
this happening I don't want this to be a new tool, like a new political weapon. And I worry that that's what this has become.
I think that cutting something they just don't like is one thing. Cutting crime, waste, and abuse is another.
Mhm.
So I wouldn't care if they went and did the chainsaw to crime, waste, and abuse. It's just not, you don't cut programs that Congress or people believed just because you don't believe in that program. If it
Mhm.
was already agreed upon, you can't cut it as long as it's not crime, waste, and abuse,
Right,
you know?
right.
And that's what they have to come to grips with. But they're so dysfunctional. I mean, I think, we shouldn't be running this government based on presidential executive orders, right? Congress should be
Yeah.
passing this stuff. But it just goes to presidential executive orders. The next one comes in, wipes everything out, and puts in their own stuff, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's
that's
just
just
chaotic.
not gonna.
I mean, we're not
Mhm.
a stable country. We're not, and that's the other thing is, if you're look, and you and I agree, we want to see the war in Ukraine end, but that there's what's happened with Ukraine has shown how you cannot. The rest of the world is saying, and they're saying you can't trust the United States. Every 4 years they flip, and so for 4 years you get one thing, and then 4 years later you get somebody else in there, and they say, never mind, we don't want to do this, and we actually side with the other side. So we're
Mhm.
now, which look, I want to see that war end, but at the same time, the long term implications of ending it, just don't want to be confused. I absolutely am for ending this war, and people are dying, and it needs to stop. But there is another side to that, and that long term ramification is the United States is not trustworthy, and that's really clear to the world. And I don't
Yeah,
know if
we're
that's
not
a good thing
trustworthy.
to have that.
Wow.
I mean, it
We're
is
not
what it is.
trustworthy. Well, and I think these countries, like I was saying before, they so badly want to get out from underneath us. Ukraine is a sadder situation because they lost an entire generation of people.
Oh yeah.
They they're in debt, and so to pay off their debt, they're selling. They're fighting to keep their land from Russia,
Hmm.
and they're in debt to pay off their war. They're selling off pieces of their land to international corporations, anyways. So it's a total racket when you start looking at it like that. That's such a sad situation. I mean, I don't even like, you don't even want to think about that, but these poor people have just been used and they're losing their land anyways.
Yeah.
I mean, war is never good. Is war ever good? I think the only reason you fight a war is to defend yourself. And,
Yeah.
I'm the Ron Paul person. I believe what Ron Paul believes. You have a strong defense, but you don't need to use it offensively. I mean, are there times where there's countries that are so bad and are hurting people so bad that you come in to help? I suppose, yes, just as
Yeah.
moral people. But what we're doing now, you don't go and aggressively do stuff. You don't taunt people. You don't take over. You don't ethnically help someone ethnically cleanse a region. I mean, you just don't do these things. Not if you're a good person,
Yeah. So you wrote a book, Wrong
right?
Side of History: America's Alliance with Islamic Terrorists. And you wrote that when? 2017, right? So
Yeah, it
this
was
was a
like
while ago.
2016. Yeah, it was a while
Okay.
ago. It was about the Syrian, and I think
And
it's
look at what
still applicable
happened. Now
today.
look at right, I mean, look at what's happened. We did side with Al-Qaeda on that one, and now they're in control. Isn't that so that's kind of the issue. Americans were treated like Ukraine without realizing Americans were treated like Ukraine. Ukraine, it's like slap in the face. One administration says, "We support you to the bitter end." The new administration comes in and says, "Never mind, we're pulling back." And then, like I mentioned, there's that lack of trust. Americans were treated the same way without realizing it. And we were told after 9/11, Al Qaeda is the enemy. Al Qaeda is bad. Al Qaeda, we got to go over there. We got to fight Al Qaeda. They're horrible. We're going to eradicate them completely. And then we flipped, and now we gave them a country. I mean, their reward for
Yep,
9/11 was they gained an entire country. It wasn't just that they have their caliphate in the middle of the desert somewhere. They got control of an entire country, and we helped them get that. So, from the Al Qaeda perspective, well, that was a really great payoff. It didn't even take long to go from attack the biggest country in the world, the most dominant military power in the world, go and attack them, and 25 years later, gain yourself a country. Well, I mean, the American people should feel completely betrayed by our government that this is what, and we're still taking our shoes off at the damn airport, and
I
Al Qaeda got
know.
a
Yeah.
country. It's terrible.
Well, and what we did in Afghanistan is why they got a country for the most part. We left all that military equipment. Afghanistan, what we did there, that's a big part. And Ukraine war, the black market with all this equipment, military equipment, it funded Al Qaeda taking over Syria. I mean, it funded a lot of this, what's happening right now.
Mhm.
And I heard a clip of Trump, and this I agree with him on, and this was from years ago before he is in office now. And he was saying that, is Assad the worst of the, I mean, is he worse than the opposition? We don't know that. Assad is
Right.
probably better than Al Qaeda. He was saying that back then. And now we're sitting in a situation where it's proven to be true. I mean, Assad, as much as people didn't like him, he's better than what they put in now. And they're slaughtering Christians like you wouldn't believe in that region. It's really bad.
Yeah, I did see that clip of Trump, and people thought at the time that he was insane. Saying, "Oh my gosh, he's siding with Assad, and look at him, and how dare he actually question this?" And of course, we have to topple Assad. He's a brutal regime, and he gasses his own people. Right? We heard this over and over and over again, and he was right. I mean, now in hindsight, same thing with Ukraine and Russia. He was right about that, saying we expanded NATO. We should have never done that. We told Russia we weren't going to do it. And now look, there's a war, and this could have been prevented if the US just would have said, all we had to do was say they're never going to be in NATO. That would have prevented the war, and we'll back out of Ukraine. Ukraine has to remain neutral. I mean, that how
They weren't
difficult would
willing to
that have been?
negotiate. They weren't willing to negotiate. So that tells me that they wanted the war,
Yeah.
right? I mean, Akram's razor, it is what's the simplest solution? It really seems like that's what they want. If they are not willing to negotiate, or if there's false flags, or if they're taunting them, they probably
Hmm.
wanted the war. Yeah.
Um, I want to pivot to something totally different.
Okay.
I've seen your
I'm game.
shows. You talk about so much interesting stuff, that isn't just political, but a bunch of variety of things. And one of the shows that I caught was you talking about religion. And I like that you put a disclaimer. We'll put that same disclaimer right now. Like, look, if you are, which my audience I don't think typically is highly religious, but if you are highly religious and you cannot have your faith questioned at all, like if you can't explore other aspects, then you're going to be upset by the conversation. So but try to keep an open mind. This is what you said in front of one of your podcasts, and I like that. um but you were talking about religion. Who was the guest you were talking to? But it got so interesting where you're talking about how maybe God is actually, I mean, was he just to he's not a Scientologist, right? Was it like God is
No, he's a Vatican
potentially
translator. He was a
okay?
translator for the Vatican. He translated 17 books. Yeah, it's a
And
big
so the
deal, like
idea
him saying this,
that
because he's a Mauro
maybe
Biglino. Yeah.
okay. And this is something I've thought, and this is why I want to bring this up, because I've thought, why is it humans look to the sky and say, God is up there, right? Like God is in the heavens. And then we've got the pyramids, the mystery of the pyramids, and we don't really know like
Mhm,
who built them,
mhm.
what were they for? There's all of these things, but every culture seems to believe God is up in the sky. You go to and that when we die, we transcend and that God is coming back. There's also this notion, right, of like Jesus coming back or God coming back down to earth. And so if you
Mhm.
expand your thinking, there is a possibility. Now, I know for those of you that are very faith-based, you just this is crazy stuff, okay? But what if the people 15,000 years ago or wherever, aliens came down with their massive, amazing amount of technology, and they came down, or maybe they actually are the people that were the aliens, like we came down with them and created an entire, populated the earth possibly, right? And we just keep looking back, and then they disappeared, or the technology, something happened, and we're just still looking to the skies for like our alien founders to come back. I mean, is that a possibility?
Well, according to he's translated 17 books for the Vatican. He is one of the few people in the world that really knows these ancient transcripts. And so he put out these books saying what the true translation of the Old Testament is. And it says that Elohim is means gods. It actually doesn't mean gods. It means it's plural, and it means the powerful ones. It doesn't
Ah,
mean
yeah.
God. And he says that also we were genetically modified. The scripture says well, the writing in the Old Testament says that we were genetically modified from the humanoids that were here. And it was a cross between them and us. And they wanted a slave race, a worker race. And that's us. We're this worker race. And we used to live, like, if they live about 1,000 years. I mean, this is all written there. That's his translation, he's saying. And that they used to live about 1,000 years, or they lived 1,000 years, and we used to too, but then they changed our genetic code so that we only lived to 120 max. And
Wow.
that we were changed genetically, yes. And that and Israel was just one minor place in the world. It wasn't the whole thing. There were
Uh-huh.
other places all around the world, and that one story talks about what happened in Israel, but Israel wasn't like the most important or anything. It was just one of the places. That's what he's saying, he says, and he has all these books, and he goes, you can read. I do the translation directly, and you can see exactly what the translation is.
Wow. But,
Isn't that incredible?
it is incredible, and it's made me wonder because now we've got all these congressional hearings about UFOs and
Mhm.
aliens and stuff, and now, what used to be, "Oh, you're just like a complete crazy person if you believe in UFOs." Now, we've got Congress sitting there saying, "Yeah, yeah, we've known about this for a long time," after we made people believe that others were totally insane. And I've always thought, who is behind that? I would think religion. I mean, religion is so powerful. Churches are so powerful that
Yes.
they would not want they wouldn't want that to come out. I mean, imagine the shakeup that it would have on the faith of people to find out that there's aliens that can visit us from other places. For a lot of people, that completely corrupts their entire religious belief system, and that wouldn't be possible. So, my thought has been, what happens when the aliens do arrive? How are religions going to react to that? And I guess from what you're saying, I mean, especially if this guy's like a Vatican translator, they'll just pivot and they'll say, well, actually, the Bible really says this, and this is
Oh,
along the lines
that's
of
a
what the
fair
Bible
way,
says.
yeah. Well, he says that his translations, the Vatican told him that he was right, that he agreed with them, but once he put out his own book sharing it, they fired him.
Oh,
So, they
yeah.
don't that's what he says, right? So I think that's interesting. But you're right, I mean, how are people gonna respond? Are they just gonna pivot? I think they will pivot. I think that's really
They
smart. I
do.
haven't
I
heard
mean,
that before, but yeah, I think that's
what
right.
can you do? I mean
Yeah.
once you're proven wrong and, like, the alien is standing in front of you, I mean, what else can you do?
I think you're right, but, aliens some people think that they're still here, that they're running us. Other people think that they're from another dimension. Other people
Mm,
think that they're from outer space, right? And it depends on who you
mhm.
talk to. Some people say there's aliens from other dimensions from outer space. So it gets all yeah. But what is this stuff? And is that really what angels and demons really are? Different people from or different you know, different dimensions. Is that really what
Right.
it's always been? And
Yeah,
and so I think it's really yeah. It's really interesting as this goes forward, but I think the fact that it's translated that way. I had a show on back when I was still on YouTube that got hundreds of thousands of views, and it went viral. It was with Mauro Biglino again back then, and it talked about what the ancient technology was, and we dove into a bunch of stuff. The difference between the last show that I just did and the one we did back then was his interpreter Elizabetta was the one who spoke back then. This one he really wanted to speak himself, so it was
Mhm.
kind of fun to be able to have him translate himself. And so what I asked him in this show is, what are the most impactful mistranslations from the Bible? And that's what we talked about. And then he got into some of he did back then he didn't do the New Testament, now he did. And so he
Mhm.
talks about who Jesus was, what's the true translation behind Jesus. And that's another one that I just don't want anybody being offended because I think
Yeah, that one's thorny,
even the
right? That one's
yeah, and even
that
even the true translation, the way he says it, is still a very hopeful thing in who
Uh-huh.
Jesus was. Because Jesus is every story is he talks about how Jesus was brought to free the people from the Romans, and he didn't succeed at that. And I said, well, I challenged him on that. And I said, well, I think he succeeded in giving us a mindset that can free us. And he
Right.
agreed with that and said, absolutely. And so that might be, that's more what Jesus was, is giving us the way to think so that we could be free. And
Hmm.
that's, I can't not accept something good about Jesus, because I grew up in that environment. I'm like, Jesus is good. But it's important, I think, for us to be able to still have critical thinking. And if something was mistranslated, we should be able to, was it mistranslated? I mean, some people think that whatever is written there was written by God and it's exactly the way it's supposed to be. And I guess I'm not in that boat. I think if it really was mistranslated, we should be able to realize that there's other powers that be that
Yeah.
causes things. Yeah.
Well, there's like a
But I don't
hundred
like to.
translations of the Bible. So I mean, how could
That's right.
so I mean, how and it's been translated 100 times and from different languages, and um that's why whenever especially right now, people are very much arguing a lot about some of the meanings of the Bible because they're trying to support Israel. They want to there's a lot of chatter about it right now, like who God gave the land to, and who needs to return to the land in order for Jesus to come back, like the holy people and all these things. And but I always combat the translations. I'm like, the word Jew didn't even come into the translation until like 600 years later is when finally they actually used that particular word. There was a whole different meaning for this group of people that were living in that area. And,
Yep.
just the translations, like we can't be literally massacring children because of what we believe is a translation in
Ridiculous.
a book that's been translated 100 times and 100 times moreover. I mean,
You
that
can't
to me is
ignore
right.
90%. You can't ignore 90% of what the Christian faith teaches you about being love and how you treat others in order to just support Israel. That's BS.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
not how it works.
A lot of people do it. A lot of people do it. That's how they
Yeah.
justify. But it's been used forever religion's been used forever to commit all kinds of atrocities. We see that happen with various different Islamic factions right now. There was the Crusades. There's all kinds of massacres that happen in the name of God and in the name. And that's also why I wonder about the translation of the Bible, because if people feel like they can justify massacres using it, it's like I mean, unless maybe the aliens that came and made us are evil, and our God is, that's like the evil beings, and they didn't teach us or instill in us proper morals, and because we have been murderous, we haven't ever stopped being murderous
Well,
and
Well,
hungry.
and that's what, yeah, when that's what Jesus was supposed to come back to teach us, is that, and to free us, is the lessons of Jesus was about a loving, how to be good people. Don't murder
Yeah.
people. He taught you a blueprint, his life did. And I've heard some things about Mary Magdalene and him were actually, and now this don't be offended anybody, but I don't know, do you ever follow remote viewers?
I
Ever
don't.
do, like, interview? Okay, well, I had Edward Rearden on my show, and he remote viewed. If you're interested in this stuff, guys, I just thought it was a fascinating conversation. And somebody gave him a skull that was supposedly Mary Magdalene. And they asked him if they'd remote view this and tell me what it was about. And he said that it was a skull of Mary Magdalene, and she was really happy that he was looking at it because she wanted her story out there. I know this is out there, guys.
Mhm.
It's more entertainment, I guess. She wanted her story out there because she wasn't second to Jesus, they were equals, and that they were teaching people together how to live a better life and how to
Hmm.
be connected. And I mean, it was such a beautiful story, actually, and how they were twin flames, and that men and women lived in harmony together in their sect, and they were trying to teach people to be that way.
Yeah.
And that was her message, and I think that is a good message, regardless of what you believe of remote viewing. I think that is where we need to go, right? I mean, we need to be
What
able to
is
live in harmony.
what is remote viewing?
Remote viewing, I love remote.
Yeah.
I love looking into this stuff. Okay, remote viewing is, that. Okay, I've been learning about this. I've been researching it. Remote viewing is when we all have all these senses, right? there's like 5 different types of senses we have. Animals have a lot of senses. It's like when they're
Mhm.
going to have a tsunami, they all run up, on a high hill. They sense things. And we sense things too. It just only we have millions of data points through our senses, and only
Mhm.
14 data points reach to our consciousness. And so the theory behind remote viewing is to try to tap into those senses and bring it to your consciousness. And our senses can tap into past and future and all sorts of things. So, but we're all connected, supposedly. That's the theory. And
Hmm.
that the better you get at it, it's amazingly accurate. Like some of the things that I've seen these remote viewers doing, like Dick Elgar and Daz Smith and Edward Reardon, the remote viewing team, the future forecasters group. Some of the stuff they do is so darn. I had them do a target for me, and it was so incredibly accurate. I was floored, and like I couldn't believe they could come up with all the stuff they came up with. And so sometimes they just really nail things. And it comes from those 5 senses and bringing those millions of data points and trying to get it to your consciousness. That's the
Okay, so
theory
yeah,
behind it.
all right, so remote viewing, the supposed ability to use the mind to perceive information about a distant or unseen object or location. So it's generally considered a pseudoscience. There's no scientific evidence that it exists, right? Of course. Um,
Yeah, there's a bunch
Interesting.
of quacks that do it, but it's super
Okay.
interesting. And,
I mean,
there was
just because
go
it
ahead.
can't be empirically studied does not mean it's a, that's what when it comes to, because I think this about like astrology and things is people always want to say, oh, it's a pseudoscience, it's quackery, but it's like just because you can't empirically study
That's
it
right.
yet doesn't mean that it's not real. I mean, there could come a time in the future where we can actually empirically study this, and then it's not a pseudoscience anymore. It's a legitimate science. So you can't just discount something just because our human limitation right now is we can only study certain things. We haven't even
That's
been
right.
able to really study like gravity, for example, but nobody just discounts that it exists. But
That's right.
interesting.
Well, just because what we can't see, and we know we have our senses, and we know that how can you explain how they're so accurate on so many things? The
Yeah.
government knows. I mean, the government hires people like them to do stuff. They hire psychics. They hire these people to help with, cold cases, and
Hmm.
many times they have. And, it's pretty interesting.
It kind of goes with my personal belief. I used to also be very religious and prayed every day and read my Bible every day and all of that. But now I'm not as religious. I still believe
Mhm.
in something after this, but I this kind of goes with my personal belief, which is I think that in the end, we are all one. We're all like one energy source, sort of, and we go back to that energy source, and we maybe reincarnate, or maybe we go to a different dimension or different place. I don't really know what happens or at what point we get to graduate from this life, or if we ever do, or if we just keep circling back over and over, but that we're all connected. And so that would make sense at this kind of remote, like we're able to, we're connected with each other's minds and with everything. And so we're able to do that remote viewing. To me, makes sense for my personal beliefs. If you could tap into it, it's just that we're not typically able to do that because we're blocked.
Well, and I wouldn't believe it if they weren't accurate on things, right? I mean, if they weren't
Mhm.
accurate, I'd be like, "Okay, you guys are just kind of having fun and doing silly stuff." But they actually are accurate, and they do it blindly. Like, they have a blind target, and actually, they do it double blind. So, they don't like, they give some number that references an area or something to look at, right?
Mhm.
And the person giving them the target doesn't know what it is either. They have another third person that collects all this stuff, puts the number behind it, has as many images and references as possible, gives it to the person who then gives it to them. And so they're completely blind doing this. And how
Yeah,
do they come up with, how are they so accurate? I mean, how are they even in the ballpark of stuff, let alone
yeah.
being accurate? You know, I
It's
mean,
kind of like,
yeah.
I another book you wrote, Connection. What is this one? This is The Connection, Water, The Connection of Water, is that one that you wrote?
It's how water connects all things, and it was based on a interview that I did, and, and then others, later I did some more, interviews and talks about water, water is just incredible because we're made up of water. The majority of us is,
Mhm.
something, I don't know what, 80% water. I don't know what the percentage is, but we're mostly water.
Yeah.
And water has memory, right? Water changes shape. Like if you put anger up to water, it changes. If you put love or joy, it changes. So your that I believe that that has a big part of why the placebo effect, the placebo or the nocebo. The nocebo is the opposite of placebo. Why
Mhm.
that works is because you're and why consciousness works is you are projecting what it is that you want. And because structure of the water actually changes and it gets into the streams, it connects all of us. And then,
Mhm.
when you're in it, when you have anger in your heart and you're drinking water and you're perspiring, you're perspiring, you're sweating,
Yeah.
and it's all connecting us. And
Interesting.
that shape of water of anger comes into me or comes into you. And how does that change us? How does joy come in? And so I think it's also how, when people, I'm getting theoretical here, but
Yeah.
how, when they talk about raising your vibration, does that mean that we change our attitudes, which changes all of us because we're connected with water, and then that raises our vibration together?
It must do
I mean,
something. I
there's
mean, they've seen those experiments where you can like yell at a plant. Like you have a plant and you just yell at the plant
right.
and then the plant like shrivels up. Or then like another plant, they talked nicely to the plant and said, gave it the same amount of sunlight, the same amount of water to both plants, but one of
That's
them
right.
was just mean to the plant and one was really nice to the plant. And the one that they were nice to flourished. And they've done these experiments over and over. And it just shows that there's something in the energy that we're exerting that's actually changing the things around us. And people know this about even medicine. If you like, people can just die of being negative. They just will
Well,
think
the
themselves to
nocebo.
death.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they'll die. But I bring it up also because astrology is something that I've always really been into, and it used to be my party trick when I was in college. I could, I knew enough about it. I'm not as good at it right now, but if I read up on it and I get myself back into it, I could talk to you for about 15 minutes, ask you a series of questions, and guess your sign, your astrological sign, with a
Wow.
really high degree of accuracy. And it used to be the fun
Wow.
party trick. Oh, my friends would bring me, when I'd be at a party in college, I'd be like, Kim, come do this. Guess his sign, guess his sign. He doesn't believe in astrology, guess. And I would just ask like 3 or 4 questions. And then I would say, then this is what you are. And I could actually look at them in their face and kind of know based on what they look like. Physical traits would give away a
Wow.
person of what I think their sign is. And I used to be so good at it.
Well, I'd make
And
you do that for me right now.
I wish I could. I'm not as
Oh,
attuned to it as I
that's so
used to
cool.
be, so I
Yeah.
can't do I'd have to, like, really study back up on it, and then I can and be really, like, well versed on it again. And there was one book in particular I would read, and it was called Linda Goodman's Sun Signs. She was alive back in the early 1900s, like 1920s, 30s. So the language is really old timey, but she was the best astrologer ever. And she wrote a book, the Linda Goodman Sun Signs, where it goes through like how to spot an Aries, and then it would give pages and pages of like what an Aries is all about, and then it would go into the Aries man, and you could read up about an Aries man, then the Aries woman, then the Aries child, then the Aries boss, then the Aries employee. And it would do this for every single sign. And when I would read that whole book, which is the size of a novel, I could guess by looking at people and just asking them a few questions what their signs were. So the idea is that we are like 80% water. It's like what you had mentioned before, something along those lines. And the moon we know has an impact on the earth, right? We know that the moon controls tides, like high tide, low tide of the ocean. It's definitely having an impact on the earth. And so the theory behind astrology being like how it works is because we're made up of water, when we're born and we come out of the womb, we have, and it changes because we're surrounded in water and then suddenly we're not. That the impact of the skies, the moon, the stars, the position of them have a certain energy, just like they do with the tides of the ocean.
Mhm.
And it pulls on us in a certain way and it shapes like our personalities. I don't really believe in the daily horoscope stuff, like, oh, today this is going to happen to you. But it's more of a,
Mm.
I do use it even today in my life. It helps me navigate relationships very well, where I understand a person better if I know their sign. So it helps me know,
Wow.
for example, with employees, if I have a Leo employee and I have a Leo, and then maybe I have a Taurus, and maybe I have a Capricorn, then I know how to motivate them, what kind of praise to give them in order to keep them
Wow.
happy, to so it shapes a person's personality, and I find it to be incredibly accurate. But the theory is that it's because it's water, and we're made up of water, and that's kind of the idea behind that's one of the theories of why it might work is because of the water and
Well,
the impact.
the does the moon have more of an impact than the sun,
No, I think it's
or is
probably
it
this
not
it's
really?
like when it comes to astrology, I think it's just the skies, the heavens in general. So it would be
It's
like the
all of it.
stars,
It's all of it.
all of it pulling on us in a I bring up the moon because we know scientifically the moon has an impact on the water on Earth. It creates the tides.
Yep, yep,
So
yep.
we know the tides are controlled by the moon. But we don't know, that's as far as they've gone. But we don't know like what the impact is of other aspects in the sky on other parts of the world. Like maybe they have a lot more impact. It's just obvious the tides are obvious. So they know that one. But perhaps the stars have an impact on plant life, or maybe but things that we don't know, or even our
Yeah.
moods and things. And that's kind of the idea behind astrology, is that, well, that's what some believe. Those of us that really have studied it know that the theory is
So
that there's something to do with the water.
so, like, I'm a Gemini. So would everybody who's born in this Gemini state or around me, would we all kind of be motivated by the same things? Or is it I'll go down to like the day and the time of day and stuff?
Well, there's another type of astrology that I'm into, which my viewers all know about, called destiny cards, and that one does go to the day. So there's Chinese astrology, which is like the year you're born. Then there's Western
Yep.
astrology, which is the month you're born. And then there's this, they believe it's Middle Eastern astrology that then goes to the day you're born, and it also has an impact. There is also these pulls on you that have an impact, and I find that to be really scary accurate as far as I could predict using the card system. And it's not like tarot where you dish out cards. It's set in stone. And I can predict deaths, uh, births. I can
Wow.
predict like practically everything using this system. I can tell you when you're going to move, you're going to have a new job, get a divorce, have a kid, get married, um, like have all of these various different things happen in your life. And it's also really accurate. And people, I've had a lot of people in my life that are not believers in it. And until they meet me and get to know me, and then I start giving them these like little readings, and then everybody around me becomes a believer. Like every single
Well,
person, what
yeah,
did
if
the
it's
cards say?
accurate.
What did the cards say? Yeah, it's crazy. I don't know why it works. It's one of those things where this is a science that we just have not figured out how to empirically study. But people should be cautious
That's
not to
right.
just discount things because they don't understand it, or they think that it seems like gypsy-ish or something. No, we just haven't figured out how to empirically study it. But when you think about astrology and you know that the moon has an impact on the tides, then wouldn't there be, and you know that we're also made up predominantly of water. So is there maybe some possibility that the stars and the skies have some impact on us? Why wouldn't it? I mean, it has an impact on the ocean. I mean, shoot, if the moon can actually make the ocean move, that's like a pretty incredible thing. Something in the sky.
That that's right. That's incredible. And that's why I was saying with remote viewing, when something is that accurate, you can't say it's not real,
Right.
right?
Right.
And same with
Right.
that. That's incredible.
Yeah, it's
I haven't
and
I've heard
I don't understand it, but I was able to predict, and how my viewers know this is because I was able to predict Trump would win. And I predicted that he would win from looking at the cards back in 2016. And I believed, like everybody that day, that Hillary Clinton was going to win. And I wasn't doing political talk at the time. I was doing just a regular radio show. And I went to work. I looked at the cards, and all my producers and everybody in the staff knew that I was into the cards. And I came to work that day and I said, "You guys won't believe it, but I looked at the cards and Trump wins." And they were like, "No, the
what
cards are finally wrong. They are finally wrong." And I was like, "The cards were clear as day. Hillary Clinton loses." Like what I saw was her losing. I didn't see him winning. I saw her losing. the card around her was a major disappointment, like full on death loss. Like it was
Mhm.
terrible. And I was like, she loses. I don't know why, how that's, and everybody, and then of course, we all were shocked that day. And everybody on my staff looked at me and said, oh my, those cards, those cards. Like everybody the next day at work was like, those cards, those cards.
That's
And they were
awesome.
right.
They were blaming the
Yeah.
cards. They didn't like it.
They were like, those cards are
Yeah.
so right. I mean, they're just so accurate. And it's like, I can't explain how they're accurate. I just know that they are. And I use them in my life. And they help me prepare for things that would be difficult, like sudden losses, deaths, divorce. I can see things that are going to happen to me, and then I could kind of prepare mentally and
Wow.
emotionally for it.
It's
Yeah.
incredible.
Yeah, so
Oh,
and
so
then it predicted, marriage when I got married. It predicted one time I was doing my radio show. This is before I left to do political talk, and I had no intention of leaving. I was a syndicated radio talk show host. I had a show on the FM dial, all across
mhm.
the country. I was, like, in 50 cities across the country, and it was a very successful show, and I didn't have any intention of leaving it, but I looked at the cards and I saw that I would be changing jobs, and I thought, "Well, that's weird." It's like, what in the world I saw this for, like, 6 it would have been, the next year. I saw in the next year that I would have this job change. I thought, "Well, that's strange. I just can't imagine that." I'm in a great career and all this, but I prepared. I started saving a lot more money. I changed my car out. I was like, well, if I'm going to be jobless, I don't want to blow all my savings if I don't have a job. So I'm going to I bought a Prius, and I was like, I'm going to prepare to Uber drive if I need to Uber drive, because I don't want to be so I literally, I got rid of my Mini Cooper. I bought a Prius, and
Yeah.
people were wondering why I did it. And I was like, well, because I don't know
Wow.
because I think, maybe I'll need to Uber drive or something. And sure enough, what ended up happening was I walked away from the contract. We were in contract negotiations for a new round, and they offered 3 times the amount of money. And ultimately, I made the choice. I had a variety of
Wow.
reasons why, but I unforeseen at the time when I saw it, and I started preparing. I ultimately decided I could not continue on with the deal, and I walked away. But I was set up and prepared. I'd already, like, did what I needed to do to prepare for a job loss, and it ultimately was me that walked away and made the choice to go, but I saw it in the book. Um, so it helps me, like, plan ahead a little bit on those types of things. Yeah, isn't that crazy? So then I could kind of look
That's
and see,
incredible.
yeah, if I'm gonna have,
And
like,
and
loss or change or moves or anything. It's interesting.
and you're more successful now probably, right? I mean, as far as I don't know
Um,
about more
I mean,
suc
probably
different
not.
success, happier?
Yeah, probably not. I mean, I left actual corporate terrestrial radio, and it was a syndicated show. That's the top you can reach in radio.
That's
That was
great.
like,
Yeah.
that's as high as it gets. And but my reasoning for it was I didn't, I was in my mid to late 30s, and I just thought, I don't see radio lasting this long for me, throughout until I'm at retirement age.
Yep.
I mean, I've got like 30 more years. And I don't know if radio is going to be around 30 more years, and if I could really hang my hat on this career. And so I decided to pivot to video and online, and it has been successful, yes. But I don't. But yeah, I mean, more. I mean, being in, it's kind of like, when you're on Fox News, or like Tucker. If you're on Fox News and you're killing it, and then you're no longer on Fox. I mean, I would argue, even if he makes more now doing his own thing, um, more. And people will say, well, the numbers are higher on Twitter. He gets more views. I don't really believe that. I still think he probably had more power and a bigger audience when he was in the mainstream. That would be my argument. As much as I would love for
Oh,
independent to be, truly
it's
a
easier too, isn't
replacement.
it? Kinda having a job. I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
versus
right.
it is. It is. I
It
mean,
is,
I
but it's
like to I've
also
been an entrepreneur.
stressful. It's stress because you have to show up, you have to. I mean, I do now. I have to do my show every day at a certain time. Like, there's, but I can do it from anywhere. And I'm in control of, well, I mean, I don't know. I had all that with radio too, to be honest with you. Nobody told me what to say or what not to say, or they probably would have told me not to say certain things had I gone too, too much in one direction. They might have been like, well, can you tone it down on that topic a little bit, but
Yeah,
I
they
think
control
that's,
it a bit.
yeah, they don't, the way
But it
they
is
really control it is they just fire you. If they don't like what you're saying, they don't really go around telling people what to say. That's not, maybe in the news, the news aspect of it where you're just not really like a talker, like a Tucker or a Rachel Maddow or something, but you're just
mhm,
like doing the news. Maybe they give them the scripts of what to say, and that's why they're all saying the same thing, and we've seen those videos. But usually what they'll do, like with Joy Reid, she just got fired from MSNBC, right? Not my favorite. I did not like Joy Reid at all, so I'm not, but that's, she said they didn't like my viewpoints, and she blamed it on Israel Palestine. Probably true, to be honest with you, with corporate media, and
yeah,
they got
yeah.
rid of her. So that's what they do. They won't tell you what to say. They'll just fire you and replace you with somebody that says what they want to have said.
Well, in her case, she kinda deserved to be fired because of some of the stupid crap that she said. You have to at least have be somewhat truthful,
Yeah, well,
but I
then
I would
Rachel
bet they
Maddow
didn't
shouldn't
care
have a
t
job. Rachel's like the big,
That's right.
when has she ever been right about anything? All of her, and she's a big conspiracy theorist. I mean, talk about a conspiracy theorist. I got the Trump tax returns, or like Chris Christie and this bridge gate or something. And then she does these big long investigations that last years. And then in the end, they end up being absolutely nothing. I don't know what she's ever been right on, but she makes a fortune and people still listen to her. I mean, it's crazy. Trump,
It's
Russia, the whole,
incredible.
she spent like 4 years on that. There was nothing there.
Well, isn't it incredible that they can be wrong day after day after day, and they don't have to pay the price for it? I mean, you would think that in a society that's functioning well, you
Yeah.
would be rewarded for telling the
Yeah.
truth over and over, and those who are wrong all the time, especially in a business where you're supposed to be putting news out there,
Yeah.
right?
No, I mean, that's what happens. I mean, I was on the Hill Rising. My co-host at one point was Alyssa Farah. She's now on The View, and she sat there and scoffed and laughed at me when I said the COVID vaccine does not stop the spread. She said, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, that is not true. Of course it does. It does. It does." She got elevated. I mean, that's what happened to her career, is that she ended up getting picked. I mean, not that I want to be on The View, but it
Sure.
still is a showcasing of what happens, to those who just say the narrative. They get elevated, they get promoted, and I ultimately was censored and had to walk away from that show because they wouldn't let me interview Fauci. So it was just this, and because they were blocking me from interviewing Fauci. So it was, she got
Wow.
elevated and got a big job and is making a bunch of money, and the truth teller that ended up being right about the whole COVID thing, um, I that's what I mean,
Well, you
that's the
should
thing that's
you
insane.
should have been rewarded. I know, that's the whole thing is in a civilized society that's functioning well, those of us who are found out to be truthful, we're the ones telling the truth, and it turns out to be that way, we should be
Yeah.
rewarded, not the other way around. I mean, that really is how it should be, but, I guess you know,
Well, it's
that's
kind
too
of
much
wor I
to
mean,
ask.
but it is kinda happening, right? I mean, look at Trump. He's now
I
president of the
suppose,
United
yes.
States. Right? So that here's a guy that had been saying things that the mainstream was claiming. Well, I mean, that's why they went after him so hard, right? The establishment could not believe the stuff he was saying, like, "Hey, maybe Assad's not as bad as the alternative," right? Or, "Hey, maybe we shouldn't expand NATO." I mean, he was saying all the things that were anti-establishment, and ultimately it did pay off. So I'm seeing that change. I mean, and then on the flip side, I think he's extremely establishment when it comes to the Israel stuff. It's like, God, could you just show that you're
I
bought off
know,
anymore? It's terrible.
I
But
know, I know.
he's at
And
least
in that situation.
anti-establishment on some. So I'll
Well, and
take
that's what I try to
what I
tell
can
people,
get.
we gotta yeah, we have to yeah, we gotta take our wins where we can get it and then push back where it doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because if we're always pushing back against absolutely everything, then it just doesn't work that we have to encourage the good stuff and fight like crazy for the bad stuff not to happen. And
yeah.
and be smart in what we fight because otherwise we're going to be against everything all the time and we're just going to lose, right? I mean, that's where
Yes.
I'm at.
Well, Sarah, this has been such a fun conversation.
I don't
And
love this.
you have so many fun conversations. on your show. I do have the link down below for people to visit your site, sarahwestall.com. And you do have a newsletter, and and is that where people can watch your show, and how often do you do it?
My show is 3 or 4 days a week, usually at 6 p.m. It airs on Rumble, and then it goes out everywhere. And you can follow me, go to sarahwestall.com, follow me on audio podcasts as well, or follow me on, any of the platforms I'm on. Follow my Substack, sign up for my newsletter. That'll get on my Substack, and then you'll get notifications of things that way too. But I'm kind of all over the place. I'm not on YouTube. They won't let me back, but I'm
What
trying.
did you do? Why did they not let you on? What
I
is
don't
you got
know.
censored?
They
COVID or
they
something?
Yeah, I think it was
Or
COVID during the
J6?
COVID thing when I
They really took a
well,
lot of
yeah,
people, and nobody knew why they were doing it, but it really then we saw the trend, and anybody who talked about the election, in 2020 got booted from YouTube, hardcore. I mean, they were really strict about, "Don't you dare question an election." I'm like, "Do we live in a
that's right.
democracy or not?"
Yeah,
Can't
that I
question
mean,
the
that was what
election.
happened. I got kicked off the day that you remember when there was a huge group of people that got kicked off? I got kicked off that
Yeah.
day. And then in August, they
Was it like January 3rd? Was it like that, or
it was no
February 3rd, I think?
it was November 2020, or it
Okay.
was the 2020 election, so it was November 2020,
Yeah, you might have been
like
part
2
of the
weeks before
February.
the
There was like a
election.
it was before the election. There was like a February
Yeah,
slaughter that where they just went and
yeah.
eradicated a ton of people from YouTube when they had covered J6, then they were talking about the election, and they all got wiped out completely from YouTube. It was
I was in
terrible.
the first. I was in the first slaughter. And then, but I got put back on in August for a day, and now I'm sitting in this perpetual yeah, it's like, "What the heck?" And then I know I didn't put anything bad up there, and, because I was really careful, right? And then they
Mhm.
took me back down, and now I'm in this perpetual appeal process. Like, if you go in,
Wow.
it says that you're in appeal, it usually takes up to 2 days, sometimes longer, and that's it, and it's been like that since August.
Well, you must have been
So
saying something truthful because they don't want people to hear it. That's how it goes. Well,
it's really sad.
Sarah, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really great.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it, so I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we've got all the links down below. Sarah Westall, thank you again. Such a pleasure. Definitely check her out. Go to the Substack, sign up for the newsletter. Also, definitely watch the shows. I just love how your shows are about so many different topics, and it's so fun. I like that a lot. So definitely check it out. Sarah, thank you again.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. Have a great day.